Imagine this. A black man in his late 60s walks into a martial arts gym. He doesn't talk much. He doesn't dress the part. And within minutes, someone tells him he's in the wrong place. "We don't do cardio for seniors here," they joke. Nobody laughs. But nobody stops it either. What they don't know is, this man used to train soldiers. He's broken bones, buried brothers, and rebuilt his soul more times than any of them have thrown a punch. And today in that gym, someone's about to learn the kind of lesson you can't find on YouTube. The kind that changes everything. He barely looked up when he walked in. Just a glance. A flicker of curiosity that passed too quickly to mean anything. Another older man. That's what they saw. He wasn't what this gym was used to. No sleeveless hoodies. No earbuds. No tattoos of wolves on fire. Just a tall black man in his late 60s. Maybe older. Wearing a faded denim jacket, sweatpants, and a pair of boots so worn down the soles looked paper thin. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't announce himself. He stood quietly by the front desk, already holding a completed waiver form. Signed, no hesitation. Coach Ryland was in the middle of teaching a warm-up drill when he noticed him. "Sir, are you here to observe or—" The man looked up, steady. "I'm here to train." Ryland, 33, tall, fit, blonde, and full of the kind of certainty only men in their 30s have, chuckled politely. "With all due respect, this is a high-intensity space. Competitive, sparring, grappling, tempo work. Might not be the right fit." The man didn't smile. He just said, "That's okay. I'm not here to compete, just to move." A few of the younger guys overheard. One of them, Corey, 19, all muscle and attitude, nudged his buddy and muttered, "Probably watched Cobra Kai last night." The man heard. He didn't flinch. They gave him a corner on the mat. They didn't expect him to last 10 minutes. The moment the warm-up began, he moved differently. Not faster, not harder, just cleaner. Each motion is exact. Each breath is measured. The kind of movement you only get from repetition. The kind that comes after the body has forgotten everything except what works. Then came partner drills. Coach Ryland, still amused, paired him with Dante, young, fast, good with his hands, proud of his jawline. Dante raised his gloves and grinned. "Let's keep it light, old school." The man simply nodded and took a position. First round. Dante lunged with a textbook left jab. The man leaned, not much, just enough, then shifted his weight and redirected Dante with a subtle pivot that sent the kid stumbling off balance. Second round. Dante got serious, came in harder. The man slipped under the hook, stepped into the pocket, and turned him in a hip toss so fluid it looked rehearsed. Dante hit the mat flat. The gym stilled. Ryland raised an eyebrow. "Go again." This time, he stepped in himself. What followed wasn't flashy. It was quiet, precise, devastating. The man didn't block, he absorbed, redirected, cut angles Ryland hadn't seen coming. He never raised his voice, never changed expression, but in under a minute, Ryland found himself face down, staring at his reflection in the polished floor. When he stood up, his breath was heavy, his pride heavier. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, half joking, half breathless. The man took a towel, wiped his palms, and looked him in the eye. "Name's Elijah Grant. I ran Northside Dojo for 27 years. Trained police departments, correctional officers, and a few guys who went pro. Retired 8 years ago. Buried my wife. Haven't touched a mat since." No one spoke. Ryland blinked. "Why now?" Elijah exhaled slowly. "Because I miss being seen." Later that week, the whispers started. "Is that the Elijah Grant? Didn't he used to train heavyweights in the 90 seconds? Wasn't he the one who taught no-jai ground defense to state troopers?" The gym felt different. Not in a loud way. Quietly, men stand straighter when wisdom walks into the room. In the way, even the cockiest kids started watching their footwork a little more carefully. But it wasn't just his technique. It was the way he corrected without belittling. The way he watched first, always watched, before speaking. The way he held space, not with dominance, but with presence. A week later, the gym owner showed up. Not because of Elijah, because of complaints. About Coach Ryland. His tone, his ego, his inability to listen. A few parents weren't happy. A few members were considering leaving. The footage of Elijah's silent lesson had gone viral. Rylan was quietly asked to step down. Elijah wasn't asked to take over, but he did. He didn't change the gym's playlist, didn't cancel sparring, didn't give lectures on honor or posture or breath. He just showed up. Every morning at 6:45, he'd roll out his mat, clean it himself, tape up the worn bag in the back corner, and wait. People followed, not because they had to, but because they needed to. One morning, a teenage boy who never made eye contact asked, "How do you stay so calm?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He pointed to the center of his chest. "Because I fight from here now, not from here," he said, tapping his temple. "And not from here," he added, touching his fist. There was no applause, no belt ceremony, no big farewell for Coach Rylan. But there was something better. There was silence. The kind of silence that only comes when respect walks in quietly, sits down, and teaches without asking for attention. And from that silence, something real began to grow. Not a gym, a brotherhood, a return. The story everyone thought they knew about him wasn't the truth. It wasn't even close. They knew his hands were fast. That was obvious. They knew his timing, his control, his ability to read a fighter's center before the first blow ever landed. That kind of skill didn't come from YouTube tutorials or cardio kickboxing classes. It came from something older, something burned in, and they knew his name, Elijah Grant. The man who walked in one day and quietly dismantled egos with a smile that never reached his eyes. But what they didn't know, what no one asked, was why a man with that much talent had disappeared for 8 years. Why someone who used to train professionals, command respect in rooms filled with badges and belts, had gone silent and stayed that way, until the envelope arrived. It was left at the gym's front desk late one evening. No return address. Just the name, Elijah Grant, written in thin, careful print across the front. Coach Andrea found it and handed it over the next morning without giving it much thought. Elijah stood there, holding the envelope, eyes narrowing. He didn't open it right away, just stared at it, as if some part of him already knew what it held. He waited until the gym cleared out, walked to the back office, sat down alone. The second he unfolded the letter, everything inside him went still. It was a copy, an old internal review, a case file from the military. No headlines, no dramatic summaries, just cold clinical language and a single damning phrase. Excessive force used against unarmed civilian incident unresolved. He didn't need to read the rest. He'd lived it. Afghanistan, 2009. A house marked as cleared. Elijah, then Master Sergeant Grant, entered on orders. There was a boy, thin, jittery, no older than 13, who reached suddenly into his waistband. Elijah reacted on instinct, dropping him with a single strike meant to disable. The boy lived. But he never spoke again. What was in his hand? A comb, silver, decorative, something a kid might carry if he wanted to feel older than he was. They told Elijah he should have waited. The house had already been marked safe, but he was too aggressive, too fast. They said all the right words. Behind closed doors, they said something different, that he made them vulnerable, that his decision had to be punished to protect the larger machine. So they folded the case, quietly, gave him a desk job, pushed him out with paperwork that said early retirement, but tasted like exile. He came home to a country that said thank you for your service, but wouldn't look him in the eye. His wife died 2 years later. Cancer. Fast. Unfair in the way only grief understands. After that, he stopped teaching, stopped moving, stopped being who he used to be, the man with control, the teacher, the warrior. He became quiet, and for 8 years, he lived like that, until the day he walked back into a gym and met a kid who didn't flinch, a coach who underestimated him, and a fight that didn't feel like a fight at all. It felt like breath, like remembering how to be alive. The letter was still open on the desk when Andrea walked in. She paused, saw the look on his face, didn't ask what was wrong. But Elijah looked up anyway. "You want to know who I used to be?" he asked. "This," he held up the paper, "this is who they said I was." Andrea stepped closer, Is it true? Elijah nodded once. It's true, I acted. It's also true I didn't have time to wonder what was in his hand, because wondering gets people killed. And it's true that after that moment, everything I knew about who I was fell apart. He folded the letter, laid it gently on the table as if it were glass. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. I just wanted someone to know I didn't forget. I still carry it. Every day. Andrea sat across from him and looked him square in the eyes. Then carry it, but don't carry it alone. The next day, Elijah showed up early. He didn't teach. He didn't lead. He just stood by the mat, waiting and letting the weight of yesterday settle into his bones without letting it crush him. A kid approached, young, nervous, looked at him like he'd just stepped out of a myth. The kid asked, "Does it ever go away, that feeling?" Elijah smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. No, but it stops being the only thing you feel. That Friday, Andrea gave him the closing class, no big announcement. Just handed him the clipboard and walked off the mat. Elijah stood at the center, surrounded by students of all ages. Some who respected him for what they'd seen, others simply felt safer when he was present. He didn't give a speech. He didn't talk about war, mistakes, or redemption. He just said, let's start with breath, because sometimes the only way to teach people how to fight is first to teach them how to breathe through what they're afraid of. And for the first time in years, Elijah Grant no longer felt like a man trying to escape his past. He felt like a man finally moving forward, even with the past walking beside him. He stood in front of the gym door for 23 minutes before walking in and not pacing or hesitating, but just standing like he wasn't sure if the man he used to be still lived inside him or if this place would let him breathe again. Inside, the walls smelled like sweat and ambition. The sharp slap of gloves hitting mitts, the bark of instructions bouncing off mirrors, the steady rhythm of ropes cutting through air. None of it surprised him, but something deeper hit him harder than he expected. The noise wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It reminded him of who he was before everything collapsed. Elijah didn't want to be recognized. Not yet. Not like this. The last time he'd worn a gi. His wife was still alive. The last time he coached someone, it had been a teenage boy with too much rage and not enough guidance from a father. The kid had graduated. Elijah had buried his sense of worth somewhere in the back of that same gym and never came back. Until now, a new gym, new city. No one here knew his name, and that anonymity felt like a strange blessing. He didn't introduce himself, didn't volunteer stories, just signed the waiver, rolled out a mat, and stretched in silence. People noticed the way he moved. It wasn't flashy, but it was refined, rooted, intentional. Like each joint remembered more than it let on. The younger guys watched but said nothing. They didn't know what to make of him. Some called him OG, half respect, half mocking. That first week, he didn't speak unless spoken to. When someone asked if he trained before, he just nodded. When asked where, he said, different places. His answers were short, but never cold. He wasn't hiding. He just wasn't ready. Until Tuesday night, when Coach Felix, a young but respected instructor, ran a sparring rotation. One of the more aggressive fighters, Marcus, decided to go a little harder than usual. He was testing people. He was also testing himself. Elijah had seen it before. That hunger, masked as dominance. That ego pretending to be skilled. When Marcus landed a cheap elbow on a smaller fighter, Elijah stepped forward. You don't need to prove you're strong, he said. Marcus turned amused. You calling me out, old man? Elijah didn't blink. No, I'm reminding you there's a difference between strength and control. And gi, and son. Marcus took the bait. Let's go then. Unless you're scared, you'll throw out your back. The room went quiet. The kind of calm that makes even the music feel as if it has turned itself off. Felix tried to step in. Elijah raised a hand. It's all right. What followed was not a fight. It was a reminder. Elijah didn't strike first. He never had. He let Marcus come. Fast, wild, full of pride. Elijah used only 3 moves. A slip, a redirect, a sweep. Marcus Marcus landed hard. Once, then twice. Then I stayed down a little too long the third time, not from injury, but realization. He had just been undone by someone twice his age, moving half as fast, using a style he didn't even recognize. When it ended, Elijah offered a hand. Marcus took it. No words, just breathe. That moment opened the first crack in Elijah's wall. That night, Felix approached him after everyone had left. "You used to be somebody," he said softly. Elijah laughed once. "That's the problem. I stopped being somebody the moment I stopped believing I deserved to be." And just like that, the door opened. He told Felix the real story, not the legend, the truth. The years of teaching, the community center he built with his wife, the tournaments, the pride, and then her illness. How watching the strongest woman he'd ever known fade away left him hollow. How, after she passed, the sound of the mat under his feet felt like betrayal. How he packed up every gi, every medal, every photo, and walked away, because continuing without her felt like pretending he hadn't lost everything. Felix listened. No judgment, just respect. "Why now?" he asked. Elijah paused, because the silence started feeling heavier than the memories. The next day, something shifted. Not in the gym, in Elijah. He moved with more presence, not for show, but with intention. He started offering tips, quiet ones, the kind that didn't sound like corrections but revelations. "Shift your balance. You're thinking too far ahead. Breathe before you strike. It's not panic, it's rhythm. Feel where they're going before they get there." They listened, not because he demanded it, because his voice carried weight. That Friday, a young woman named Camille pulled him aside. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "How did you come back from not being you anymore?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't answer right away. He looked around the gym, the motion, the breath, the life. "I didn't come back to be who I was," he said. "I came back to remember that I was never just the things I lost." Camille blinked. It landed, deeper than she expected. Later that month, Felix handed Elijah a class to lead. No fanfare, no pressure, just a quiet trust. Elijah stepped onto the mat. No clipboard, no notes. He stood in front of them all and said, "We're not here to fight each other. We're here to fight what's trying to make us forget who we are." And they listened, not because he was loud, but because finally he was home. She was the last person anyone expected to be there, especially not on a night like this. It was pouring outside, one of those stubborn southern rains that stuck to your skin and made everything smell like wet concrete. Inside the gym, the energy was high but scattered. The regulars were cycling through pad drills, half focused, half watching the storm out the window. Coach Felix was absent that night, leaving the floor to the assistant trainers. That meant looser form, louder music, and more ego than usual. Near the back wall, a new girl was trying to keep up. Her name was Naomi. Thin, wiry, not athletic in any obvious way. Her ponytail was too tight. Her movements are too tense. You could tell she was afraid of taking up space. She didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, her voice barely lifted past a whisper. She had joined the gym 3 weeks earlier and hadn't landed a clean punch yet. That night, she was paired with Shane, big, impatient, the kind of guy who thought correction was the same as domination. He was barking at her. "You're holding your breath again. You can't throw like that. You're scared of your arms." She tried. Jab, weak, cross, off balance. Shane groaned. "God, this is hopeless." And that's when Elijah stepped forward. No one had asked him to. He hadn't coached that week and had barely spoken to anyone except Felix. He mostly kept to his corner these days, quietly rolling through breath work and slow drills that looked too old-fashioned to impress the younger crowd. But now, he walked across the mat like someone who had already made a decision. Shane saw him coming. "What's up, OG?" Elijah didn't smile. "Switch." Shane scoffed. "She needs someone who can push her, not baby her." Elijah's eyes didn't waver. "She doesn't need a partner. She needs someone who knows how to listen." Shane didn't argue, not because he agreed, but because Elijah's tone didn't leave room for anything else. Naomi looked up, startled. "I'm sorry." she whispered, already blaming herself. Don't apologize, Elijah said. Not tonight. He held up the mitts. Again. Her jab was hesitant. Again. A little sharper. Again. This time, he adjusted her feet with the side of his boot. Drop your back heel. Feel the ground. Let it carry you. She exhaled. Threw another. It landed clean. Someone nearby turned to look, not because it was powerful, but because of the sound, the confidence behind it, the shift. Now close your eyes, he said. She hesitated. Trust me. She did. He moved to her side. Now throw it again. No target, just memory, just rhythm. The first punch was awkward. The second was smoother. By the fifth, her breathing had changed. Her spine had lengthened. She opened her eyes. I've never hit like that before, she said, barely audible. Elijah nodded. Because you're trying to become someone new, but your body already remembers who you were before fear taught you to flinch. She stared at him, like he'd just opened a locked room inside her chest. That night, she stayed after class. So did he. She asked if she could talk to him outside. He agreed. They stood under the awning, watching the rain. I had an ex, she began. He never hit me. Not really. But he made sure I stopped believing anything I did was right. Took 5 years before I stopped hearing his voice every time I moved. Elijah didn't interrupt. He just listened the way he always did. She continued. When I came here, I thought I just wanted to get stronger. But now, I think I just want to stop apologizing for surviving. I'm to be present. He nodded slowly. Then don't. You've already done the hardest part. What part? You walked through the door. She exhaled like she'd been holding that breath for a year. The following week, something changed in Naomi. She wasn't louder, she wasn't faster, but she was rooted. When she moved, she no longer asked for permission. She was participating, owning, and showing up. Other women noticed. One by one, they began staying after class. Just a few minutes at first, asking Elijah questions, sometimes about form, sometimes about fear. He never gave long speeches, never quoted books, but his words stuck like truths you didn't know you needed until you heard them out loud. One night, a woman named Sandra, in her mid-50s and recently widowed, asked if she was too old to learn to fight. Elijah looked at her. You're not here to learn to fight. You're here to remember you don't have to anymore. She cried in the parking lot, not because she was weak, but because someone finally saw how long she'd been carrying strength in silence. The gym started feeling different after that. Fewer selfies, more eye contact, less noise, more breath. And Elijah, he kept showing up, not because he needed to prove anything to anyone, but because someone always needed what he had. He had finally stopped hiding. Not speed, not power, but presence. And for the first time in years, he wasn't just part of the room. He was the reason others stayed, not to become fighters, but to stop apologizing for being survivors. They say the truth will set you free, but no one tells you how much it might cost on the way there. It started with a quiet Tuesday. Nothing unusual. The gym smelled like canvas and chalk dust, the way it always did by late afternoon. People were working pads, checking their stances, flirting between rounds, pretending they didn't mind getting hit. Elijah was watching from the corner, like he usually did, now present but not loud, not teaching, just watching. He had become a presence in the gym, a compass, some would say. The man who never raised his voice but somehow made people listen. He had earned that through sweat, yes, but primarily through patience, and that stillness of spirit that only comes from having been broken and rebuilt. But no one knew all of him. Not really. Then came the envelope. It was waiting on the front counter. No stamp, just his name, written by hand. He stared at it for a long time before opening it in the storage closet, behind the folded mats. It was a photocopy of an old report, one he hadn't seen in years but could recite by heart. The words hadn't changed. Use of force incident, civilian injury, subject discharged, internal review, sealed. The paper felt thinner than it used to, or maybe his hands just remembered how heavy it once was. He folded it once, then again, slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Didn't speak of it for the rest of the day, but something in him shifted. That night, as everyone was packing up, Naomi came over, joking about a punch she'd finally landed. She smiled, expecting his usual nod. Instead, Elijah looked at her for a moment longer than normal. You think people would still respect me if they knew the worst thing I ever did? Naomi blinked, surprised. What do you mean? Elijah didn't answer. Not right away. The next evening, he asked Felix if he could speak at the end of class. Not about drills, about something else. So when the clock hit 7:50, Elijah stepped onto the mat. No gloves, no clipboard. Everyone quieted without being asked. He took a breath, then said, I need to tell you something. Not because I want to be forgiven, but because hiding it has started to feel heavier than living it. And then he told them, Afghanistan, a mission that went sideways, a boy who moved too fast, a flash of silver, a split-second choice, a collarbone is broken, a head hitting the edge of a table. The boy didn't die, but he didn't speak again. And Elijah? They called it excessive, he said, and maybe they were right. All I know is I haven't stopped carrying that moment since. There was no gasp, no outrage, just silence, the kind of silence people sit in when they feel something shift. I didn't share this to confess, he continued. I shared it because I've spent too many years pretending it didn't change me. But it did. It still does. Every time I correct your stance, every time I tell you to breathe before striking, it's because I didn't. He looked down for a moment, then added, softer. I teach because I need to. After a long beat, it was Joseph, the ex-cop in his 60s, who never said much, who stood first. Then teach me, he said, because I've got one of those stories too. And just like that, something cracked open. Not loud, but deep. By the end of the week, Elijah found a handwritten note taped to the gym's door. It read, I never told anyone what I did during Katrina. Now I want to learn how to live with it. No name, just that. And every day after, more followed. Folded pieces of paper slipped under his gym bag. A woman who asked if it was too late to learn how to be strong without needing to fight. A teenage boy who asked, not for technique, but for quiet, for somewhere safe to stand. Elijah never put the report on the wall, but he didn't hide it anymore either. He kept it in a clear sleeve, taped to the inside of his locker. Visible, honest, part of him. People didn't stare at it, but they saw it. And over time, that became enough. He hadn't lost their respect. He deepened it, because in that room, strength wasn't just about control or power. It was about truth, the kind that humbles, not humiliates, the kind that makes space for other people to show up too with their flaws, their guilt, their unfinished chapters. And the man who once believed he could never be whole again now taught others how to be entire with scars. No one expected the gym to feel like a cathedral that night. There was no music, no chatter, just the dull hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of breathing sharp, focused, like the kind that comes before a storm or a revelation. The whiteboard simply read, tonight's lead, Elijah Grant. For weeks he trained quietly, correcting his footwork and offering tips like breadcrumbs dropped in silence. He never demanded attention, never sought recognition. He arrived, observed, and vanished like a shadow with purpose. Most assumed he was just another older man staying active. Some called him Sir out of respect, others ignored him. But tonight the room knew better. He entered wearing a plain black hoodie, hands wrapped in aged cloth tape, each step quiet but certain. His eyes met every person's, not asking for permission, but granting it. The room straightened before he said a word. We're going to start by breathing. A chuckle broke the air. Nervous. Then stillness. And for 10 whole minutes, they breathed together. No movement, no aggression. Just the sound of people remembering they had lungs, control, presence. When they opened their eyes, something unspoken had shifted. In combat, Elijah said, the first thing you lose is breath. Get that back. You get yourself back. They began, but what followed wasn't drills. It wasn't a workout. It was a quiet dismantling of habits, a rebuilding from the inside. He didn't bark orders. He asked questions. He corrected with one-word sentences that cut deeper than any shout. Why the rush? What are you afraid of? Feel your feet. You keep leaving them behind. People move more slowly, but with greater deliberation. They hit with less force, but more intent. Somewhere between the sweat and stillness, a kind of reverence crept in. It wasn't worship. It was recognition. They weren't training to win. They were learning how not to disappear. Midway through, the front door creaked open. Everyone turned. It was Malik. He hadn't been back in nearly a month. Quick fists, big ego, never listened. I once got into it with the coach and walked out mid-session, but tonight he looked different. Shoulders tense, eyes worn, no gym bag, just jeans, a hoodie, and something fragile in his stance. Elijah walked toward him and said nothing, handed him gloves. Malik shook his head. Didn't think I was welcome anymore. Elijah tilted his head. It's not about being welcome, it's about being ready. Malik hesitated, then nodded. They moved to the mat. Their spar was unlike anything the class had seen. There were no blows traded for pride. It was like watching an old musician guide a student through an unspoken duet. When Malik overreached, Elijah caught him not to throw, but to realign. When Malik faltered, Elijah didn't strike. He waited. Then, with one fluid move, Elijah stepped through Malik's stance, wrapped him gently, and lowered him to the mat like setting down a prayer. No power play, just presence. Malik lay there, blinking, then smiled. I thought I came to prove something, but I think I just needed to remember who I am. Elijah offered a hand. You didn't forget. You just got loud. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then, as if a chord had been struck, it exhaled. Training resumed, but something had broken open. People hit with less noise, but more truth. They watched each other, listened. One woman who had never spoken more than 5 words whispered, I didn't know training could feel like coming home. Elijah just nodded. As the night drew to a close, Naomi, the soft-spoken accountant who trained after work in oversized sweatshirts, approached him. I used to think I didn't belong here, she said. You do? No, I mean I thought being strong meant yelling louder, lifting more. But you teach like stillness is a weapon. He smiled. It is. So is silence. So is breath. She paused. What do you think people see when they look at you? Elijah thought for a long time. Hopefully, he said, someone who never stopped showing up. She blinked, then nodded. That's exactly what I see. He stayed after everyone left, like he always did. Cleaned up gloves, folded towels, wiped down the board. He started to erase his name, then stopped. Instead, he wrote something new. You are not forgotten. You are not finished. It stayed there for weeks. No one erased it. Because that night, Elijah Grant did not just teach a class. He taught a lesson on how to return to yourself after life has tried to reduce you. He showed every person in that room that dignity doesn't shout, that strength doesn't have to dominate, and that the most powerful man in the room might be the one who listens before he speaks. He had carried silence like armor, and that night he gave it away like a gift. The gym would never be the same, and neither would they. Sometimes it's not the fighter with the loudest voice who changes the room. Sometimes it's the one who enters quietly, says little, but carries a lifetime of knowing in every breath. Elijah's story isn't about winning fights. It's not about glory or youth or medals hung on a wall. It's about something quieter, something more profound, the quiet dignity of a man who's lived through storms and still chooses to show up. He walked into that gym a stranger, older, black, silent, and without even speaking, he became a mirror for all the people who had forgotten what quiet strength looks like. For those who thought age meant weakness, for those who assumed race and silence meant he had nothing to offer. But Elijah never needed to explain himself. He just moved with presence, with grace, with control, and the room changed around him. There's something powerful about watching someone move like they've got nothing left to prove. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't challenge anyone. He just let his actions speak. And what they said, loudly and clearly, was this: I haven't lost my edge. I've sharpened it through pain. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a teacher, whether he wanted to be or not. And the lessons he gave, they weren't just about stances or strikes. They were about resilience, about presence, about letting go of ego and remembering your essence. What Elijah showed us, and maybe what we all needed to be reminded of, is that healing doesn't always look like peace and poetry. Sometimes it looks like sweat. Sometimes it looks like showing up to a room full of strangers with nothing but your truth. And perhaps most of all, he showed us that you can carry a mistake for years and still choose to live forward. He could have hidden, could have disappeared, could have stayed in the shadows, letting his past define the rest of his story. But he didn't. He walked in anyway. Not because he wanted to prove anything, but because he knew he still had something to give. To the younger coach who mocked him, Elijah became the lesson, not through anger, through excellence. To the girl in the corner who didn't think she belonged, he became the reason she stayed. To the ones watching silently, the ones carrying their own stories, shame, silence, Elijah became hope. Because that's what real strength looks like. Not the ability to strike harder, but to return softer. Not the urge to dominate, but the choice to uplift. Not just the courage to fight, but the wisdom to stop fighting the wrong things. So here's the truth, friend. No matter how long it's been, no matter what you've been through, you are still becoming. You don't need a crowd to tell you your worth. You don't need permission to reclaim your strength. And you certainly don't need to fit someone else's idea of what ready looks like. If Elijah's story touched something in you, if you felt seen or understood or reminded of something you forgot, that's no accident. That's your story whispering, I'm not done. Maybe you've been hiding a part of yourself. Perhaps you've been carrying something heavy, alone. Maybe you've been waiting for a sign. This is it. Speak again. Move again. Show up for yourself, even if no one's clapping yet. Because somewhere, someone is watching you, and you might be the reason they don't give up. So if you're still here, reading this far, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for listening with your heart. Thank you for staying open. And thank you for letting stories like this live again. We'd be honored to hear your voice. Tell us what part of Elijah's journey stayed with you. What did it awaken in you? Leave a comment, not for the algorithm, for yourself. And if you know someone who needs to remember their quiet power, send them this. Sometimes a story can go where even words can't. And if this kind of storytelling resonates with you, gentle, powerful, and human, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, not for numbers, but for connection, for the community, for stories that move us beyond the noise. Follow us, listen more, watch more, and most of all, remember, you're not alone. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us. Wishing you strength that doesn't need to shout, peace that finds you in quiet moments, and the kind of day that reminds you, you still matter. Have a beautiful day ahead. We'll see you in the following story.